In the U.S., what's happening is what many in the media are calling the president's war with the Senate. And they're saying that it's terrible, that it's unprecedented. Personally, I think it's great. And let me explain why. The U.S. president cancels the signing of an already prepared law and announces, "I won't sign anything else until you do, until you give me what I want." I'll explain what he wants now. This happened last week, yes. No, actually, this week there was a real ultimatum to his own Congress, to his own party. When it's against another party, that's understandable. But against his own, yes. Actually, again, that's my point of view. I'll speak only from the standpoint of freedom. What this whole story actually shows is something positive about the Republican Party. Members of this party vote according to their conscience, not in lockstep, unlike the Democrats. It's hard to manage a party like that, yes, but we want a government that actually thinks, not one that salutes every time the boss walks by. Meanwhile, there's another story. Several Republican senators voted against their own president's military powers. Their fellow party member, their leader, the head of their own party. And 2 days later, they changed their vote after a closed briefing at the White House. What did they show them? Something like this. That's what they showed them. And most importantly, this shows just how limited the power of the American president really is to, for example, wage war without Congress. Today, we'll discuss why Trump wants to break the rules that have protected America from tyranny and the majority for 200 years, and how we should think about it. Even though I feel very positively, I think there hasn't been a president, a prime minister, or, I don't know, a chairman, whom I've felt as positively about as Trump. And yet there's much more here than just a superficial understanding of the issue. I'll explain everything now. Those who want to understand America, to understand the difference between America and, in fact, all other countries in the world, to understand why America is unique. That doesn't mean it's easy to live in or to govern. Listen for the next 20 minutes and a lot will become clear to you. This video has, in a way, 3 layers of one story. The first, how the relationship between the president and Congress works, which are 2 equal branches. Well, I think they say in English, co-equal branches of American government. The second, this is about what really happened with the senators' attempt to limit Trump's military powers in Iran, and why 2 senators changed their decision. And the third, in my opinion, the most important layer, the most important point. I don't know, they all get mixed together. What is a filibuster? Why does Trump want to get rid of it? And why could this be the most dangerous idea of recent years, even if today it seems convenient? And also, gentlemen, so you don't get nervous while waiting, I'll tell you how they actually decided to act in order not to remove the filibuster. And a bit later, I'll tell you something that will affect you, as a Russian-speaking audience, people from certain countries, especially strongly. Be patient, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get there. This week, Donald Trump was supposed to sign the housing bill. It's a bipartisan, agreed-upon bill designed to lower housing prices for millions of Americans. Well, as you know, I'm opposed to such laws, simply because I believe that's not the right way to lower housing costs. But whatever, so to speak. It's 2 parties, they came together there. They always need to puff themselves up and say, "We did something for you." Even though they perfectly understand what a mess it actually is, then they went through with it together. The ceremony was already scheduled. So, Trump had another chance to puff himself up again, but at the last moment, Trump announced there would be no signing. Why? What? When? Until when? Until Congress passes the SAVE Act. Well, that's the act about protecting the rights of American voters. He called this SAVE Act a matter of extraordinary national importance. Like a state of emergency, right? Extraordinary urgency, extraordinary importance, that's more accurate, right? The left-wing media, so to speak, figuratively exploded. As if nothing like this has ever happened in America, you know. But those who have a bit of memory or the desire to look at the facts from a historical perspective will easily remember or find, if they look, that Nixon, that was in 1969, blocked spending that had already been approved by Congress. He was also trying to achieve something. Clinton did the same in 95. Andrew Johnson in 1866. Serial vetoes on the Reconstruction Acts. Reagan, 1981, repeatedly threatened to veto budgets. Ford, in 1975, vetoed a spending bill and also demanded something be done there or else. That is, almost all presidents have used this tool as a way to push through their ideas. We continue. We're talking about this as well. Let's just note that at the same time in the House of Representatives, Congresswoman from Florida, our favorite, Anna Paulina Luna, along with a group of Republican allies, blocked the work of the entire House. No other bill is being put to a vote until the Senate passes the SAVE Act. Got it? That's it. Young, beautiful, energetic. Even the defense budget was affected. Can you imagine that? For the Republicans, which is absolutely unheard of for Republicans, let's put it mildly, it's unusual, right? What does this mean in practice? The president is holding the entire legislative process of the country hostage. Housing, the budget, defense, for what purpose? For the sake of a law that he considers a priority. What is it? And why did he bring the country to a halt because of it? By the way, just so you understand, it's an absolutely legal, extremely tough, but legal lever. Not a single law moves forward until the main one gets the green light. So there must be something in this law that is more important to the president and his associates than everything else happening in the country combined. Well, what is it? We'll get to that. And we'll see if it's really that important. Or maybe it's just President Trump's whim, like a little child jumping and shouting, I want it, right? So there's a question that I brought up. In a few minutes, I'll explain why exactly this law became the line that Trump decided to stand his ground on. Well, I mean, not like Obama's red line, which he easily said, I'm drawing a red line, I can't, and then immediately let it slide. And, you'll be surprised by what I'm about to tell you. It's all about a number, and that number is 80. But I'll explain later why and what this number means. This number unites Republicans, Democrats, and independent voters. Almost equally, that is, I'll say that the president and the people have actually de facto united against Congress and the Senate from both parties. Well, hold on, everything will happen in its own time. At the same time, another storyline is unfolding, just as important, quieter, calmer, but no less important for understanding how power really works in Washington. June 23rd, the U.S. Senate. They voted for a resolution that requires Trump to stop military actions against Iran without separate authorization from Congress. Not exactly to stop, just without separate authorization. We won't allow it, you don't have the authority. I want to say right away that no matter what they vote for, nothing will change. For a number of reasons, I won't get into that now. Trump will keep doing everything just the same, but for them it's more of a symbolic act, in my opinion. And the vote was 50-48, just so it's clear. That is 4 members of their own party, let's see, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, and Rand Paul. But Rand Paul always votes against things like this, right? I respect him for that. It was a historic moment. For the first time since the War Powers Act was passed in 1973, both chambers of Congress simultaneously supported limiting the president's war powers. Trump was. Well, I think I'll use the word rage. It fits. He was in a rage. They say he yelled at the senators like crazy, right? Well, at a closed-door lunch with his fellow party members in the Senate, he had an argument specifically with Cassidy. So, Cassidy, one of the senators, right? So, he demanded an explanation as to why they should even vote for such a resolution. Cassidy didn't back down. He replied that the senators still hadn't received comprehensive information about the course of the conflict, which, by the way, the president started without congressional approval. And here's what happened next. Why am I telling you this? Because they were shouting at each other. Let them shout, after all. They're both on edge, like everyone there. They all have problems, maybe with someone or something. Yes, they lose their temper sometimes. It happens. Then they have a beer, like Obama once suggested to everyone, and they forget about it. And so here's what happened next. This is an important detail that most media for some reason skipped over. The White House didn't publicly pressure him. They could have, right? Instead, they called Kassiri. They invited him. They said, please come. We'll give you a briefing. The vice president himself will tell you everything. When Kassiri arrived at the White House, Witkoff joined them as well. The special envoy. right? The senator was shown the real picture of the negotiation process with Tehran, what stage the deal is at, that Iran is actually ready to join, what is at stake. And gentlemen, after this briefing, Kassiri publicly called it, he said, thorough. And on June 25, when the resolution was put to a vote again, he voted against it, that is, for Trump. And the resolution failed, 47 against 50, and Rand Paul, just to be clear, at Trump's personal request, changed his vote from against to abstain. He couldn't vote in favor simply because he has certain convictions that he has never sold out and never betrayed. But he himself said directly, "My views have not changed." Rand Paul, "My views haven't changed. I just decided to give the president more room to maneuver for negotiations." What does this really mean? It's not that Congress was sold or bought. No, it means that one substantive briefing with real information can turn the Senate's vote on the issue of war and peace. It's wonderful that a senator could, after reviewing the materials, say, "Gentlemen, I was wrong. I'm changing my mind, and I support the president." Now imagine what would happen if not a single senator received such a briefing, no one at all, because the rules that force the president to negotiate with the opposition will simply disappear. I'll talk about this rule in a minute, and this is the most important part of today's conversation. And this is where I want to address you specifically, those who grew up in the Soviet Union, who lived in Israel, in the post-Soviet space. Because what I'm going to talk about next, voting without documents, without verification, is exactly what many of us have experienced, not in theory, but in our own lives. We know what it's like when a voting system can't be verified. We know what happens to legitimate authority when no one can say who actually voted. It becomes legitimate or illegitimate and no one can verify it. That's why the next blog won't be just abstract American domestic politics for you, but a very familiar story. Gallup. October of 24, 84% of Americans support the requirement to show ID at elections. Of them, among Republicans, it's 98% I don't understand where they found the 2% who are against it. Overall, 84% of independents and 67% of Democrats. That's surprising, right? Pew Research Center. August 25th, 83% of all adult Americans support the requirement for photo identification. Among them, 95% of Republicans and 71% of Democrats. So they couldn't even find those 5% of Republicans who, it turns out, don't want people to show ID. Maybe they were just drunk. Maybe they didn't understand what they were being asked. Rasmussen. Well, honestly, I believe this one the most. In January 2025, he gave a similar number. 77% of all American voters consider this a reasonable measure to protect the integrity of elections. This, as they say, seems right to me. So if you average everything they say, it's 80% of America. Remember, I said 80, right? 80% of America, that very magical number. Of course, only citizens should be allowed to vote. Of course, it needs to be clarified. Is the person who came really who they say they are? Of course, or not. In other words, this isn't a party split among ordinary citizens. It's an agreement, something rare in today's polarized America. Well, in general, it's rarely seen. Republicans, Democrats, and independent voters, for the most part, want the same thing. For a person who comes to the polling station to confirm who they are, and for only citizens of the country to be able to vote. And who doesn't want this to happen under any circumstances? Take 3 guesses. Well, let's wait and see, because a little later, all secrets will be revealed. I'll even say that a little later, everything unclear will become clear and understandable. Let's look at other countries. In the overwhelming majority of the world's democracies, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Canada, Israel, Japan, even Mexico and India, you can't even vote without an ID. Who are you? Why did you come here? No one in these countries considers this oppression or discrimination. It's basic. It's a basic procedure without which it's impossible to answer a simple question. Did the person who had the right to vote actually vote? Or did someone who didn't have the right vote? Whoever was given a sandwich went and voted as they were told. Without identity verification, this question fundamentally has no answer. Not because there are necessarily a lot of fraud. Not necessarily, but because you simply don't have the tool to check or rule it out. If you don't have it, you can't rule it out. And now here's the main contradiction, which is obvious and which can't be explained by simple conspiracy theories. If an ordinary voter, Democrat, Republican, or Independent, almost equally supports this measure, then why does the Democratic caucus in Congress vote against it 100%? Block by block, vote by vote, and just try, as they say, to step out of line. One step to the left, one step to the right, 1-2 execution. The SAVE Act, this very law, yes, passed the House of Representatives. At first, with Republican votes, the Democrats stood united against it. They came up with reasons why, yes. In the Senate, its passage is being blocked by that same united front. Let me remind you, on all issues, about 80% of voters are telling their representatives, "We want everyone who votes to be checked if they're American or not, and to verify who came to vote." But the Democratic Party is resisting, as if their life depends on it. So the question arises, maybe their life, well, their political life, really does depend on not having it checked. Could that be the case? The official position of Democratic lawyers and human rights organizations is this: documentary proof of citizenship is a serious burden. Wow. According to the Brennan Center, about 20 to 21 million Americans don't have documents proving their citizenship on hand. That's quite a lot, isn't it? And 2 to 2.6 million people don't have any government-issued ID at all. That means they can't go into a library, city hall, court, or board a plane. They can't do any of those things. Low-income and non-white voters, they are less likely to have such documents. So the argument goes, the new law will lower turnout specifically among these groups. That's an argument that should be stated honestly, and not just brush it off, okay, if that's what they all say. So let's take a look at this. It seems strange to me. If the problem is the burden of getting the document, then the solution is to help people get the document, issue it for free, set up mobile document issuing points, extend the deadlines, organize people using government or party funds who would go around, knock on doors, and ask, "If you don't have it, let me help you get it." This is a solvable logistical task. This is already being addressed at the state level, I think about a dozen states, but the Democratic Party's position is not to make it easier to get documents, but rather not to require documents at all. That's not a very logical position. The first is about accessibility, the second is about principle, and it's this second position that raises a legitimate question. If the requirement is so naturally approved by the party's own voters and by most countries in the world, then what exactly is it about the possibility of verification that scares the party leadership so much? I'm not claiming anything out loud here, but the answer is mass falsifications. So far, there have been very few proven large-scale cases of voting by so-called non-citizens. This is a documented fact, not just a theory, but the lack of large-scale statistics on fraud is exactly what you would expect in a system where no one allows the possibility of verification. You can't statistically prove something that is specifically designed to be uncheckable. And this systemic unwillingness to create a verification mechanism, despite the undeniable agreement of voters and the majority of democracies in the world with the very principle, is exactly what any unbiased observer would notice as something wrong. And now we come to the most important point. To the reason why I started making this video in the first place. So the SAVE Act is stuck not because the Republicans don't have a majority in the Senate. They do have a simple majority. It's stuck because the Senate has filibuster rules for moving to the final vote. For most things. Most laws need not 50 but 60 votes out of 100. This rule has existed since the early 19th century and was formalized by modern regulations in 1917, by the way, a year you might know, at the initiative of President Woodrow Wilson. The meaning of the rule is simple and actually fundamental. It prevents a party that has gained a temporary, often shaky majority from pushing laws through without, well, at least minimal agreement from the opponents. It's a safeguard against the tyranny of the majority. an institution that protects not a specific party, but the very architecture of the balance of power. And that's brilliant. It's really great. It's a big obstacle, but it's really great. And it's this very rule that Trump is publicly calling to abolish. Back during the height of the record shutdown in the fall of 1925, he wrote on his social media calling on Republicans to use the so-called nuclear option, meaning to eliminate the filibuster. Immediately, the Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune publicly refused at that time, stating that his position on the importance of this rule remains unchanged. That's why it's a bad idea, even if it seems convenient right now. The history of the United States over the past 15 years is a story of the gradual erosion of this very rule. In 2013, the Democrats under Obama eliminated the filibuster for lower court judicial appointments. In 2017, the Republicans came and said, "Oh, is that so?" and eliminated it for Supreme Court appointments as well. Each time, the decision was made by the party that had a temporary majority, and every time the argument was the same: we really need this. We need it right now. And every time, after a few years, the weapon ended up in the hands of another party, the one that temporarily gained the majority next. Is it just today that the Republicans are removing the filibuster for the sake of the SAVE Act? With the same tool, with the same ease of a simple majority, the Democrats, during their term, will repeal these voter ID requirements, meaning the requirements to present identification documents, and they will pass any judicial reform, any law at all, without the need to negotiate with the opponent. A rule that today seems like an obstacle to a good and popular law will tomorrow become the path to an unpopular and wrong law, from our point of view, and a very popular and correct one at that, because the 60 votes will disappear. And as soon as this requirement disappears, the need to negotiate will disappear as well. That's why I believe, and I will repeat this in every video where this question arises, constitutional checks and balances must not be broken, even when the goal seems absolutely right, even when 80% of the country supports the result. The republic, our republic, is not based on the correctness of a specific law today, but on rules that work the same way no matter who is in power tomorrow. So basically, there was a deadlock. The Republicans wouldn't agree to abolish the filibuster, and Trump said he wouldn't sign anything until they passed this law. Since Senate Leader Chun refused to abolish the filibuster, the Republicans are using not the abolition of the rule, but something else. Thank God they started thinking in that direction. The tool that is originally built into the rule itself is called budget reconciliation. I think for most of you, all of this sounds absolutely crazy, right? It's an interesting procedure with its own rules and limitations. This is when a decision needs to be made on a certain law and an agreement has to be reached between the Senate and Congress. So, reconciliation. I don't even know how to say this in Russian. If anyone knows, write to me. Debates on this are limited to 20 hours. And for the final vote, a simple majority is enough, not 60 votes. But there are some problems with this. That is, moving the law into this framework eliminates the need to have 61 or 60 votes. You can get by with 51 in the Senate. But it's not easy to do. What kind of beast is this, and why hasn't it been proposed before? Let's figure it out. It all starts with the budget resolution. Here, they made some kind of decision on the budget, which sets the levels of spending, revenue, and deficit for the budget year. All of this relates to the budget. Next, a filter comes into play. It's called the Byrd Rule. It prohibits including in this bill, in this reconciliation, yes, any material that is unrelated to budget instructions. So you can do this kind of thing, this workaround, this maneuver, let's say, going into another area, only if it relates to the budget, to money, to budget decisions. And in this Byrd Rule filter, there are 6, let's say, tests for unrelatedness. So you can't just put anything in there, add anything that way, because otherwise you would be putting all the laws in there. What you add has to meet certain 6 rules. The law that Trump wants the Senate to pass. It needs to be rewritten so it's clear that if it exists, it means it meets these rules. And also to make one more thing clear, it's not just like, oh, we wrote it, that's it, let's go, right? There is a position in the Senate called the parliamentarian. This person checks before the bill is put to a vote to make sure everything has been done according to the rules. No one will vote if he says no. This position was specifically created so that the majority couldn't push through whatever they want in the Senate and Congress. In other words, it looks like some kind of trick, yes, that can be used to do something that's otherwise forbidden. No. So there's this obstacle, yes, a barrier. Let's break down why, as soon as you have this parliamentarian, all of this becomes law and not a trick. In other words, it's legal, not trickery, yes. The Byrd Rule has existed since 1980 precisely so that reconciliation wouldn't become a way to bypass the filibuster for any policy. So I think there have been 24 reconciliations in Congress over the past 50 years. This is a routine procedural process, not a violation of norms. Both parties use this rule. If the text submitted is not challenged by the parliamentarian, then it is completely legal and normal. It goes to debate and then to a vote. For the SAVE Act, this requirement to prove citizenship when registering to vote has to pass the filter. You can't introduce it as an election law, you have to tie it to funding. The idea is to make verification requirements a condition for states to receive federal grants. Then the provision becomes directly related to spending and passes the test I mentioned. What does it have to do with the budget? It's very simple. Funds need to be allocated for actions under this law. $500 million to the states for citizenship verification systems, and about $200 million to the Department of Justice for oversight. Remembering recent history, Democrats used the same approach to pass parts of Obamacare and the Inflation Reduction Act, while Republicans passed the 2017 tax reform and Trump's main beautiful bill of 2025. The parliamentarian has already once rejected similar logic for this very law about, well, elections. In 2021, regarding immigration reform and the $15 minimum wage, the conclusion was that the budgetary effect is incidental compared to the enormous political impact. So the chances of the SAVE Act passing in its current form are just a possibility, not a fact. Senator Rick Scott says directly that he doesn't see a way to get any meaningful part of the SAVE Act through reconciliation. But nevertheless, right now the lawyers of the lower house who are working on this have said that they seem to have some kind of way forward. So the speaker also, so to speak, called Trump and went to meet with him, because it seems they found some legal maneuver to get this through. But no one knows how the parliamentarian will react to this. This isn't hacking the system, it's a regular procedural mechanism available to any party with a majority. With the support of 80% of the population, using this legal tool is more than justified. The only question is whether the specific wording will pass the parliamentarian's review. What will change in practice for voters if this law is adopted? Currently, when registering, a voter simply swears in writing under penalty of perjury, that he is a U.S. citizen, but no document is actually presented. The SAVE Act requires showing one of the documents that clearly indicates citizenship and a photo ID when voting. Next, the states get the right to periodically check voter rolls against federal databases and remove non-citizens from them. This is the essence of the law. The system with a verbal oath is turned into a system with documentary proof plus regular audits. Why is this better for the country instead of just symbolic? And already 36 states have such a law, including Iowa, and turnout there hasn't dropped for almost 10 years after the law was passed. I'm talking about it, Iowa. So in practice, documentary verification doesn't massively exclude legal voters where it already works. It's not only about the scale of the violation, which is still very small according to the government. And in Utah, after checking over 2 million registered voters, they found 1 confirmed non-citizen and 0 cases of non-citizens voting. Federal statistics show that only 0.04% of checks even detect a potential, find a potential non-citizen. That's a fact, not an opinion. Again, maybe we just don't see them because the checks are done this way. But that's exactly why. That's why the law is valuable not as a hunt for fraud, but as a safeguard for public trust. The legitimacy of election results is not only about how many votes were actually fake, but also whether the losing side believes that the process was fair. A lock on the door is justified not by the statistics of actual break-ins in your house, but by the fact that without a lock, doubts about security poison everything else. In summary, when almost all voter bases share the same position. At the same time, this is not manipulation by the elite of one party, but in line with what most people consider common sense. People who show their ID every day at the bank, at the airport, at the pharmacy when they go for certain medicines, and don't see why. Voting, the most serious civic action, should require less verification than buying codeine or flying on a plane. I want to add one thing personally. If a person hasn't felt the need to get the necessary document for voting during the 2 years between elections, then they shouldn't vote. Because a homeless person sitting on the street shouldn't decide who will be our president and shouldn't decide how much money to take from working people to give to him. He shouldn't be the one making that decision. In most of the countries where we come from, ordinary people have never had any real leverage over those at the top. Our vote was worthless because the result was known in advance, and the elected official was not accountable to anyone. Gentlemen, it's different here. It's different here. There are problems too, but still. Today, the fate of the SAVE Act does not depend on the backroom decision by a single person whose portraits hang everywhere you go. Yes, but on whether the Democratic Party can withstand the pressure of 80 voters who have clearly repeated many times what they want. And this is a test of the system. Can the will of the majority, previously expressed openly and persistently, force the elected officials to do what they were elected for? To represent the interests of you and me, not just their own? If a senator knows that for inaction he will be booted out of politics at the next election, that is democracy in action, not a failure of it. That's why my position is simple. The pressure should be maximal. If there is fraud in the voting system, this law will eliminate it. If there is no fraud, the law will prove it to those who doubt and close the issue once and for all. In any case, the country will benefit. In any case, we will benefit. In any case, the people, the population, society will benefit. That is exactly what we have. This tool of such pressure and not silent submission is the main reason why it is worth keeping faith in this system, even when it seems cumbersome and slow. By the way, the fact that it is cumbersome and slow is its advantage, not a drawback. Although we are eager and really want things to happen faster. Me too. Friends on the Telegram channel called Leon Weinstein, just like this channel here on YouTube, I post short analyses there. Between the big videos, I react to the news more or less in real time while the next full video is being prepared. Right? If you're interested in following history unfolding right before our eyes, then come and subscribe, right? Subscribe and you'll get all the information. And I want to end on an optimistic note. Yes, today America is being tested by temptation. The temptation to break the rules for an easy victory. But look, the rules are still holding. Tew refused to budge, demanded real information before changing his position. Despite all the pressure, the Senate has held not just 1 but more than 10 votes on limiting war powers. And every time it happened openly, publicly, with names and numbers, the system argues with itself out loud. And that's where its real strength lies. We don't want this to happen somewhere quietly, behind closed doors, where we have nothing to do with it. Authoritarian regimes are afraid of exactly this kind of open fight within their own system. The American Republic, along with the principles of freedom on which I base the content of this channel, has withstood much more serious challenges over 250 years. 250 years already, gentlemen. They'll get through this too. That's all for today. I'm sure there will be some very interesting events soon because they're happening all the time, and we'll meet again very soon.